Hagen from Progress Coaching. How you doing? Now, I have to give a special shout out to a friend of mine, Ty Sarajan, who's a client and a longtime buddy of mine. And he said, I'm watching your podcasts and your webcasts, and you're not getting to the fundamentals. And I said, what's that? He goes, why we need to coach. What are the benefits? So this is for you, Ty. You made me do this. But I'm going to add some further context of why we need to coach. But more importantly, I think as importantly, why we need to learn to coach. Okay. So why we need to coach is to build awareness. And one of my favorite statistics and favorite studies is by a gal, Tasha Eurich, who wrote a book called Insight. And she reports that 95% of the people think they're self-aware and only about 10 to 15% actually are. Think about that. That is a 80 to 85% huge fallout, right? So when you think about that and you think about, self-awareness, that's the major tenet of emotional intelligence. So when we go back to why we coach, and why we coach is to build awareness so people can take action. So if we could go up to everybody to add a little humor to context and say, Ty or Julie or Bill, you have a crappy attitude and cut it out, and that actually worked, we may not even need a coaching industry. So how do we coach? The one thing, I'm going to give you 3 major rules for coaching. How do you coach? Number 1, go from telling to asking questions. I think that's a fairly understood notion or understood attribute of good coaching. Number 2, emotional readiness. So when I think about emotional readiness and I think about ready to coach someone, let's say with, and I'm going to tell you a story here in a second, a bad attitude or not a very good team player. And we're running from meeting to meeting and, we're frustrated. We've had a tough day and we get to the meeting and we're about to coach someone like this and we're huffing and puffing and we're frustrated. We're probably not in the right frame of mind to coach. And number 3 is know your objective. Know your objective. The objective of coaching, in my estimation, is to help people feel good about getting better. Let me say that again. To help people feel good about getting better. So the number 1 rule is we have to know what we want. We have to know what we're coaching to. We have to know what they potentially want. And so what we have to do is coach the person and not to the situation. So let me tell you a story. And I go back to my friend Ty, who called me after one of these workshops and said, here's what I think you need to do. So I'm going to go back to the basics. But I want to use this story as an apparatus to illustrate where I think we get turned a little bit sideways. So I had a friend of mine, a client of mine, call, and he was telling me that he was coaching to this person. And he started to tell me about these situations. And I said, well, what are you coaching to? And what I was looking for were topics. And the first thing that he said was, well, I had this situation, and we start to narrate. We almost start to give ourselves permission for frustration. We almost start to illustrate why we have a point of frustration or angst. My question was, what are you coaching to? In the end, he was coaching attitude and positive teamwork. And so I said, okay, well, so specifically, what do you want this person to change? And he said, well, attitude and teamwork. And let me give you another example. I said, no, I get that he's lacking that. Okay, I get your employee is lacking this. So here's my question for you. As you told me your stories, your emotions started to go up. I sense if we were monitoring your blood pressure, and he started laughing. He goes, yeah, I'm really frustrated. And I said, okay. I said, when you think about having to coach this person, and I tried to slow the conversation down, and you thinking about coaching this person, what's the first word that comes to your mind? He goes, dread. Said, I don't want you to answer. So now I'm about to show something called reflective coaching. I said, I want to come back to it, but I don't want you to answer right now. I want us to have a conversation. So I'm going to plant the seed as a question, and then we're going to circle back to it. He goes, oh, okay. And he's a great guy, super guy, very coachable. And I said, I'm wondering if you're not in the right emotional state or have emotional readiness to coach somebody like this. And I'm wondering if your emotions are getting in the way of your objective, which is for him to what? Have a positive attitude and teamwork. And he's ready to answer like, I agree. And I said, just let it sit. So how are you having, my next question is, how often are you having conversations around cultivating a positive attitude and really becoming a great teammate outside of situations prompting those conversations? He said, I don't understand. I said, when you're coaching this person, is it because you have a scheduled meeting or you're seeing something that he's exhibiting that is contrary to what your expectations are? He said, well, contrary to the expectations. I said, so you're situationally driven? He said, yeah. And I said, so when you're coaching that person, honestly, let's go back to my question. How do you feel when you're coaching? He said, frustrated. I said, I'm wondering if that's what your employee, what he's focused on. And he's trying to get through that conversation because in that moment, that situation, would you say it's a safe statement to say that he knows that you're triggered by something he did, whether right or wrong in his mind, but perceived wrong in your mind? He said, yeah. I said, so do you think he opens up his door or do you think he cowers and gets defensive and just wants to get through the conversation? He said, oh my gosh, he probably cowers and tries to get through the conversation. I said, so the situational reaction, I'm not saying that's wrong, but do you think it's actually being masked in coaching, yet you're probably giving constructive feedback? He said, what do you mean? I said, what do you specifically say? He goes, well, I immediately point out what he's doing wrong. And I smiled. I said, so what questions did you ask him? And he said, I didn't initially. I said, okay. So what was so interesting about this conversation is he is driven by a situation. He's not proactively coaching to a positive attitude and teamwork. I said, now I'm going to share something with you. And I said, this is in no way to put me on some pedestal. This is no way to say what I do is better than you, because I think we all need to improve as coaches. I said, I love coaching people with a negative attitude. And I smile. He said, how do you get there? I said, because I don't react to the situations as an apparatus to coach. I may use the situations for my own understanding, yet you have to coach proactively, enthusiastically, openly, thoughtfully, professionally, with a smile, so they know you're vested. If you're reacting to a situation and they probably deep down know they've done something wrong, does that open up the mind? Does that open up their heart? Does that open up their willingness? Does that create a state of vulnerability for them to accept questions or feedback? He said, no. I said, so what I want you to think about is, how do you schedule sessions every single week and how do you frame them out? And when I say to be positive, I'm not saying to be positive to ignore constructive areas. I'm saying to be positive so somebody feels good about getting better. So he said, how do I do that? I said, every week, have this person come in with two things. One thing that they did arbitrarily, enthusiastically, that went above and beyond the call of duty, that really invested in another teammate positively. And maybe a situation where looking back, they may have missed an opportunity to do so. He said, okay. I said, let those conversations sit on their own. Now, I'm not saying to ignore situations you need to react to. Yet, if that is the only frame of reference that your employee has to your coaching, it's going to create or trigger a reactive measure. And he just sat there and it was like this aha moment. Now, look, do I get frustrated when I coach people? Sure, I do. Have I looked back at coaching conversations I've had where I'm like, I should have done this differently? Sure, I have. We are human beings. We've got to give ourselves some latitude. And I think one of the best things that we have to separate are situations and people. Now, the two go together. I know that. It doesn't make sense, right? Yet when you're coaching the person, you want to authentically, proactively, thoughtfully, professionally focus on the areas you want to focus on. And they could be strengths. They're not always things people do wrong. Number two, then let the situations we need to react to fold underneath what we're already doing proactively. Then it's going to be accepted a little bit more. So when I think about, why we coach, and I go back to my friend Ty Sarajan, is, the reason we coach is so we can build awareness. Once we have awareness, and again, I go back to the graphic of why, we want to coach. And I go back to this, 95% of people think they're self-aware. And this is through her work as a PhD industrial psychologist. Think of that. Coaching enables self-awareness. A good coach can provide nuanced insight about ourselves. That is exactly why we need to do that. Now, Let's talk about present market conditions. McKinsey organization just reported 41% of people are leaving their organizations due to a lack of career development and advancement, which does what? Requires conversations. So what do? We have to have coaching career conversations. Now, let me tease you a little bit. We just created a whole program with practice sessions on Progress Coaching Career Conversations. It's our new coaching initiative. And it's about, how do I coach someone who's lacking motivation? How do I coach someone who's wants a promotion and there's no promotions available? How do I coach someone who doesn't know what motivates them? And we've identified about 12 different specific areas that we need to coach to. So if you're interested, send me an email at tim@progresscoachingleader.com. So again, let's go back. Why we coach. It's really to build self-awareness. And I've said this for 29 years. Coaching's a two-step process. Number one, it's getting someone to look in the mirror, to become self-aware, to look at themselves. Most people don't. Tasha Urich's study and work reports or supports that. 85% of people are kind of fooling themselves. So if you got 10 people, 8.5 of your people are kind of fooling themselves probably. So once we have someone who looks in the mirror, number two, we get them to take action on what they see. Number one, you cannot take action on something that you do not look at. So coaching, again, is number one, getting someone to look in the mirror. Number two, taking action on number one, which most people will not arbitrarily do on their own. That's why they need us as coaches. So Ty, how am I doing? And so how do we coach? I love what we teach, and that is qualms. So you have to ask questions. You have to have activities. The A, to facilitate change. The learning project, which I demonstrated before, is something that drives the conversation focused in the area that you're coaching to. In this case with my client, he needs to coach to his employees' attitude and positive teamwork. The learning project bestows ownership and accountability in the rightful owner, the person being coached. Every week they have to come in with two examples of what they've done positively to influence their teammates with a really positive disposition or something like that. Now, the other thing I did not bring up in our story is my client did not know what motivated his employee. I said, well, what's his motivation? He said, well, I think he wants to be promoted. I said, you know or you think? He goes, I think. So he doesn't even know what motivates the person. So let's say this person wants to get promoted. Then you can bring it into the conversation such as, John, what if we improved your team's perception of you and you became influential and they really loved working with you? How do you think that will position you for a promotion? That creates the emotional attachment. Then I said, supplemental coaching. Do you have him doing anything outside your conversations? He said, like what? I said, reading books like Mark Victor Hansen's Chicken Soup books. That's the supplemental coaching. Doesn't take you any time. And he goes, oh my God, I've got to get back to the basics of progress coaching. I go, yeah, you do. And we started laughing. And so when you go back to, why we coach and then how to coach, questions, activities, learning projects, that's your conversation model. Motivator, find out what motivates them. Once you can dovetail everything to that, it creates an emotional attachment. Then if you want to accelerate it, give them things to do like journal or observe other people positively or send a handwritten card to someone once a week. Things that don't take the coach or you, the manager, any in-person time. What that does is it accelerates talent development outside of your coaching conversations. So what you have to think about is the story I told was a very simple story. My client is a great guy. He's actually a really good coach. He became very caught up, and we are all guilty of this, caught up in the emotional frustration of seeing something that is continually done wrong. Yet if that is the only place we react or coach to, the attributes that are being exemplified in a situation, people are going to be triggered to a defensive state. So let me know what your thoughts are on that. If you are interested in our Progress Coaching Career Conversation program, please send me an email. It is very, very cool. And we include practice sessions. It's one of the coolest things that we've ever done. If you have leaders who really need to know how to motivate, find out what motivates, create conversations that will lead to greater career development, which will lead to greater talent development and retention, please send me an email, put on the subject line, Coaching Career Conversations. We will send you some information. Thanks, everybody.